Hi, I'm Stephanie Noble, and I'm going to talk about how you can make open science work for you as an early career researcher. So why might we do open science as an ECR? I think first and foremost, open science is known to be one of the foremost ways we can advance science. So this has been argued by many people. I think that there are many convincing examples out there. And I'm just showing you a few different of the ways that open science principles can advance science. Another reason to do open science as an early career researcher is that this can also advance your career. So I think that you can think of these two things as very complementary. A lot of people might think of these two things as at odds, and in some ways they can be, especially in the current scientific environment. But there are some ways where advancing your career, such as building your network or disseminating your work and making it easily understood, I think is very much complementary to advancing science. And because I think that the ways open science can advance science has been discussed so much in the past, here I'm going to focus on how it can advance your career as an ECR. So I'm going to focus right here on four topics. There are many others, but just for today, for the time, we're going to talk about four. So why might you use open data and code? And by the way, for each of these topics, I'm going to talk about how, in my personal experience, this has had some benefit for me. So you might use open data and code because this saves you time, money, and effort. So this is a big one for me. For many of my projects, this cluster failure, power failure project that was an empirical resampling project, and some of my other empirical benchmarking projects that I'm currently doing. I relied on the Human Connectome Project dataset, and I've worked with many others relying on many other different types of openly available datasets. And that saved us a lot of time getting started and money, and of course, effort acquiring the subjects. You also learn a lot of transferable skills. So working with these large open data sets often require us to use many different types of platforms to analyze this data that are really going to be very useful in future applications, especially working with other open data sets. And that goes double for code. You can learn a lot of these openly available code bases and learn to contribute to them. That often is really essential to working with open data as well. You also can use larger samples than most labs could collect, that an individual could collect. And that improves power, that improves reproducibility, all that great stuff. And I'll just point you towards a couple resources, one by colleague Corian, a colleague Corey, talking about a lot of different openly available data sets that one can use. And another is a computing resource, open computing resource called Brain Life. So if you are interested, please check those out. You might be interested as well with openly releasing data, code, and papers, because that improves dissemination. That means more people are aware of and can use your work. And that can also support your career because for better, for worse, it's very important to make sure that you are recognized for your work, at least in academia. And the currency these days is citations. And we can have a whole conversation about that, but I just want to say, practically speaking, that is very important for an early career researcher to support their career. This also can lead to lots of collaborations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So I'll say from my perspective, I openly released this test-retest data set that I acquired, and that has, several people have reached out to me after that, finding it very interesting and wanting to use the data, and of course it's out there and they can use it. But I think that that's led to more attention for my work. I also have been privileged to be in a lab that values and has the privilege of being able to openly release publications. And I think that has also been shown elsewhere to improve attention to work and citations, because if you reach a paywalled article and you might not have the time, you might be on your phone, or you might not have the access or through the university to read that paper, then you're not going to be able to understand and recognize that paper or cite it. Also, the effort that goes into openly releasing data and code tends to involve some level of awareness about making the data and code reusable, which means that that can also be reusable for you as well. And I'll refer you to FAIR principles that have been talked about elsewhere, perhaps in this session, but certainly in this conference, about the importance of making your data and code fair. You might also be interested in engaging in open collaboration. This really helps build your network, which is important for your career in many different ways that can provide support and expertise in your work or allow you to mentor others, give support. It can also lead to future collaborations as well. I'd like to also point out open collaboration is kind of a newer idea that's been integrated into open science, just this idea of collaborating more broadly than just in your individual lab. And open science platforms and groups tend to be a great way of fostering more open collaborations. So I'll reflect on a couple experiences that have occurred during the pandemic. There were a couple papers, one about inclusive conferencing, another one about brain hack. And I was able to provide feedback on the inclusive conferencing paper and a little bit of information and help lead the brain hack paper. And that the brain hack paper in particular involved this massive group effort by a lot of people that really helped build my network. And I'm actually still in contact with a lot of these people. I've been since then working with several of those people in other initiatives, and in both in terms of like open science related initiatives and scientific initiatives. And I think that engaging in open collaborations can be a really, really exciting and important resource for ECRs. So if you see those sorts of opportunities that are open to anybody, I would urge you to jump in and get involved. Open science can also help you get funding and positions. It's not something that you usually think about as part of open science. But for instance, for grants, being able to save the time, the money, and the effort of collecting your own data really can support the feasibility of your grant, which is something you have to include in writing the grant. It can also help you inform your budget. You have to spend much less money on that grant. That also goes for like new faculty members. If you're able to use these open data sets, then you don't have to spend as much money acquiring your own data. And I'll also point out that hiring committees and organizations are increasingly considering your commitment to open science. This can be thought of as a commitment to service in the community, but also I know that Stanford, for instance, was hiring in the Wu Tsai Institute, and part of the hiring information was to discuss your commitment to open science. And other committees, other organizations are also interested in your contributions as service to the community. And I'll point out there are also groups within OHBM, like the Open Science Special Interest Group, that specifically is interested in your commitment to open science. And I'm also part of that, and many others that are part of that group have also, had a history of doing open science. So it can help you with all sorts of different types of positions and funding that you might not think about. So I'd also like to talk about how you might respond if your PI has specific kinds of concerns about your commitment to open science or about what open science can do to contribute to the community. Just moving out of the way so you can see the cartoon. So regarding open data and code, your PI might be concerned that it takes too much time to learn. And you can respond that it's much faster than learning how to and collecting your own new data. And that will also save time and money down the road when you want to use other open data sets. Your PI might not think you have the expertise in lab to provide training, but thankfully there are trainings available multiple times a year at other resources in the neuroimaging community, like at Brain Hack and OHBM. And people in the open science community are really happy to continue helping. So regarding openly releasing data and code, the most common concern that you might encounter as an ECR is that you might get scooped. I want to say in practice, this tends to be quite uncommon, but if this is and you can tell your PI that, if this is a major concern, you can, somebody is working on a project and is already, close to, finishing that project, and you're really concerned because you're just starting. You could always wait until a later stage in your analysis, or share once it's published. I just want to urge you to think about sharing at some point along the line rather than just holding that data and code back forever, because that really supports future science. And also, you can respond to your PI that will bring attention to your work. You or your PI might be concerned about people finding issues with your data and code. And I think that the most compelling response to that is really that you don't want bad work out there. If your PI doesn't find that compelling response, then you might have bigger problems. But I think that that's an important, that should be core to the way all of us do science. If you can't because of institutional policy, there's not really a good workaround for that. But I would urge you to share what you can and be extra clear in your reporting so that people can try to reproduce what you've done as much as they can. Regarding open collaboration, your PI might feel it's a waste of time and doesn't benefit you, but you can definitely respond that you are networking and that benefits the lab, that brings positive attention to the lab, that makes the lab look good, and it benefits your career as well. And regarding getting funding, your PI might not think that people fund an open science project, and that might have been more so true in the past, but you can just look at the NIH Project Reporter, for instance, a US-based agency, and just see how many projects have used HCP data, ABC data, etc. There's definitely evidence. I said that my projects, my own projects have gotten funded and have used openly available data. And I think that there's clear evidence that times have changed and you can get funding with open science. So I'd like to touch upon really quickly a few special challenges for ECRs. Unfortunately, some best practices could disproportionately disadvantage ECRs. Open reviewing ECRs might be especially prone to retaliation for negative critiques. Restricting publication choices only to the journals that do the most stellar job of open science practices. Unfortunately, for better or for worse, ECRs are a little bit more vulnerable to being able to more broadly disseminate their work. So that can be a difficult choice or challenge for an ECR. I'd say if you're working with ECRs, it's important to be understanding about ways that they can be particularly disadvantaged by some of the choices, some of the best practices that you might want to engage in. And this goes double or triple or more so from ECRs from underrepresented groups in science. Open science should be inclusive science. Unfortunately, a lot of open science can feel very exclusive. There's this term bropen science that have been coined by a few members of the community. I would just be especially aware of that. If you come from an underrepresented group, there are a number of communities that you can be involved in, and the open science communities here at OHBM are particularly supportive and interested in supporting underrepresented groups. So please reach out and please be aware that some of these practices can disproportionately affect you. And finally, I'd like to end by saying it's important to be strategic. You can align your goals with your PIs and really try to avoid getting burnt out or doing things that might harm your career as an ECR. If you give back 100% to the community, but for instance, you're not able to disseminate your own role in the work, that's not, unfortunately, that can sometimes be harmful in academia. So just be aware of this balance that can be struck in the earlier career side. And hopefully when you're a more established researcher and you have secure funding and tenure, you can go ahead and pull out all the stops. But until then, just be very careful. Try to do the best that you can, but try to be protective as well. All right, thank you.